Alright, ladies and gentlemen, we are back with another video. This time it's going to be the very first assembly video for the Printrbot Plus that we're doing. In the last video we covered tinting the laser cut birch pieces. Again, if this is something that you want to do it before you assemble anything. Make it much easier. In this case we chose a nice rich green. After the tinting process, I rebagged everything into fresh bags and made sure that all the pieces were indeed in the right place. So since this is not a video about the tinting, I won't go too much into that. You can watch the video online regarding the process and how we got there. As you can see, I have everything organized. All the rods, all the laser cut pieces, all the printed plastic pieces, the bearings, the motors, some of the tools, and I've got a laptop set up so I can access printrbot.com, and the new documentation site that Brooke mentioned in the update today, July 17th, 2012. When I last checked, there was not very much up there in regards to documentation, at least not new documentation, so we will have to see how that goes over time. So in the meantime, I'm going to have to use existing resources to build my Printrbot Plus. I have some of the other pieces, such as the power supply, the heated print bed, of course the ABS, and on top we actually have the power tower, which I will assemble in a later video at a later time, as well as the printer board, the belting, the hot end, and some of the cabling for that. I'm leaving some of those to the side off the main table because I really won't need those until a little later on in the process in a later video. So again, trying to be organized, so I have taken all of the hardware out and have it organized by type and length into these little trays. Kind of hard to see the M3 bolts down there because they're black oxide as well, so but they are in there and they are sorted by size, so should make the process much easier. I also went through the inventory or bill of materials and made sure that I had at least the minimum amount listed on there, and in almost every case I had exactly the right amount. In 3 or 4 cases I had a few more to maybe 5 or 6 more, so hopefully that helps out. And also have the breakout diagram just kind of handy just in case. So hardware, extra pieces, tools, parts, sub-assemblies, and then tripod so I can record this as I go. So we will be getting set up for the first step shortly and beginning our build. Alright, moving forward, now we're actually getting to the base of the Printrbot Plus. So what we have is the main deck, and then we have the front and rear base plates. And if you go through the notes online in the wiki and some of the various email threads, you'll see various instructions on how to get these oriented. Basically, the key note is to watch for these little arrows, which are on a number of pieces, and when you're done with the base, they should all be lined up in the same way. The way I have things laid out right now, this is the front base plate, this is the rear base plate, and as I mentioned, the deck. Now it's good to notice there's a little 8mm hole on this side, so we want this to our left and to the back. So the arrows are pointing towards the front, but this little hole, which does not exist on this other side anywhere, we want this hole to exist on the left hand side. Now with the rear base plate, there are obviously some differences here with the printer board holes. One's for the USB and one's for the SD card and that sort of thing. It is not symmetric, and what you want is these 2 holes which are going to match up with this little bitty piece here that has the 2 holes in it, you're going to want the 2 holes that are right, let's see, right there, to be on the left hand side. And again, you're trying to face it towards the slots that are in the deck. So again, I've got the arrows pointing away from me. I've got the 2 small holes on the rear plate to my left, larger circle to the right. Go ahead and just dry fit these by placing these tabs into these slots here, just to make sure that we have the correct orientation. Because it's pretty obvious when you don't have it correct. With these 2, they don't line up at all. So you'll know that you have it incorrect. So by having it the correct way with these 2 holes over here on the left, the tabs and slots will line up, and you should be able to dry fit just to make sure that you have everything in the right place. Alright, so now that we have everything lined up, we know that our tabs are matching up with the slots, so we still want to kind of do a dry fit. This front is supposedly asymmetrical, so it shouldn't really matter which way it goes, so you should be able to just pick the best side to go on the outside of the printer. There have been posts regarding this saying that one side may be slightly different than the other, but you will have to make that determination on your own as far as the fit. So we can just do a dry fit like that to show that it does go together correctly, so we know we have things oriented correctly. And same sort of thing for the side over here. We have everything matched up, and as I mentioned, if we try to do it the other way, you can see that this slot here will not match up with this one, this slot here will not match up with this one. But by having it the correct orientation with the 2 small holes on your left hand side, then everything does match up. So these pieces here, they, depending on what you're looking at, if you look at the paper that came with the Printrbot Plus, these are listed as 206. The rod end plates, if you go online, they might also be listed as 106. That may be a holdover from the original LC. These are going to be the 206, 207, also known as 107, the lower rod plate. And again, there's 2 of these, and finally there's 2 of these, 208 part number and 108 part number according to some of the online stuff, but they're essentially the base stretchers. So as long as you get the correct funky looking shape, then you're good to go. These have the arrows on them, these have the arrows on them, these do not. So now we will continue. Most of these parts came from the subassembly 1 or SO1 on the Plus bags. That's the base assembly, and the only thing that's left, which we'll be using a little later after we get the motors installed, are these 2 mounts that kind of are feet that kind of keep everything stabilized from the bottom. But we won't be using these quite yet, so we'll just keep these off to the side. Again, all these came from the base assembly. This little part here, there's a little strip that has a bunch of tiny parts on it, and this is where this actually came from. I believe it came from the bridge subassembly bag, or maybe the X carriage or extruder mount, one of the other bags. But there's basically a strip that has maybe 7 or 8 different tiny little parts that are all kind of still left on one strip that are laser cut, and all you need to do is break them off in order to get these little tiny parts. But this is the only one that really comes off that strip and belongs somewhere else. All those other little tiny parts, for the most part, go with one of the other sub-assemblies. I believe the bridge sub-assembly has a lot of the tiny parts in it. Anyway, that's for a later step. So now that we have everything kind of set up, we're going to get the hardware out that's required, and then we will proceed with the actual assembly. Alright, so now we're going to get into some actual assembly. We're going to take these rod end plates, lower rod plates, and the base stretcher. We've got 2 sets of these, and we're going to go ahead and assemble these together. Again, noting the direction of the arrows. In this case, I've got the arrows pointing both towards me. So I've got one of the base stretchers, one of the lower rod plates, and one of the rod end plates right here. So I'm going to assemble this like such. So again, arrow pointing towards me, arrow pointing towards me. And this part's a little bit trickier because it's kind of hard to tell, but this does not have the circles symmetrical from one side to the other. So in other words, the circle is closer to this side than it is to this side. So it does matter which way this attaches to here. So in this case, you want the part that is wider to go towards this hole over here. So again, shorter, longer, or wider over here is going to go towards the hole, and we're going to line this up, not like that. We're going to line this up so that our screws can go through these holes, then through here, and then ultimately through the nuts that are going to be captive in these little areas right here. So the way to do that is going to be put it through here like so. Take one of the nuts, and this is something that you're going to do over and over and over. Essentially, you're going to put it sideways through here and watch that it doesn't slip through the other side. So you want to try to put your fingers on the other side so that you can kind of pinch the nut in between in that little captive slot. And so now we will put this bolt through there, kind of engage it. You may have to wiggle the nut around a little bit to get the tip of the machine screw to kind of capture into it. We're not going to really tighten it down too much yet, just kind of get it caught in there because we want to be able to get this other side in. So again, as you can see how it worked on the first one, we're going to do the same thing on this part here. We're going to get the nut inside that slot, pinch it in there with our thumb and another finger, line that up, and then get the machine screw all the way through and get it to engage with the nut just enough, and then take your screwdriver and get it tightened down. Again, we don't want to tighten everything down too much at this point, and even later on you don't want to go too crazy on these because ultimately this is not stainless steel or aluminum or something. This is birch wood, so you can crush it and cause it to deform at some point. So again, sort of hand tighten it for now, and later on if necessary we will tighten it some more. So now we're going to do the same thing with the other assembly, and I haven't actually test fit this one yet, so I'm going to be kind of following my own instructions, taking a look at the arrows. This one is a mirror opposite of this one, so we need to take some care how we assemble this. So again, the arrows, we're going to make sure we have them going the same direction because ultimately those will need to match up with the arrows that we have on our deck. So we're going to insert that. That's how tight it is. It's got a nice snap to it when you try to connect it. And again, we're going to be looking at this rod end plate and making sure that the more The wider part, the more meat, whatever you want to call it. There's a lot of different ways you could describe it, I guess. You want to cover more of the hole when all is said and done with it. So that's the way you need to line it up, is so that a majority of this end plate is going to be covering the hole. So it looks like we have everything lined up. Need to get some more 3/4 inch screws. Again, these are the 6/32 by 0.75 or 3/4 inch, and then also a set of the 6/32 nuts. And again, we are going to follow the same procedure, kind of twisting the little nut around until it seats in that slot or falls through it. Again, really need to have a finger on the other side and then pinch it in between your finger and your thumb. So we're going to get this oriented correctly. Get our machine screw going through there. Get it engaged in there. So I'll just tighten just barely with my finger and get the other one going. And as you get to do this more and more, it kind of becomes second nature, and you really don't even think about what you're doing as you're putting these nuts in and screwing them down. So you gotta kind of be careful that you don't get too blasé about it and all of a sudden start assembling things in the incorrect place, or using the wrong length of screw, and using washers where you're not supposed to, not using washers where you're supposed to, that sort of thing. And generally the idea behind that whole topic, which there's quite a bit of discussion about that, anytime you have something like this, you don't need a washer. But if you do have something like this, where you actually have the tabs coming up through there and there's nothing really to hold it, so this is a case where you'd actually want to put a washer to kind of give some shoulders to grab onto on these cases. So that's kind of the general thought on that. I'll make sure I put these back in the right way. Alright, so now we have some of our sub-assemblies ready to go. So we will move on to the next step. Alright, moving things right along, now we're going to be attaching these pieces to our front and rear base plates. So here's what we need. We need 8 of the 632 1/2-inch screws. These are the smallest of the 632s, not to be confused with the M3s, which are the black oxide covered ones. We need 8 of the 6/32 hex nuts and 4 of the number 6 washers as far as the hardware goes. We need the little laser cut part, the Z stop limit switch spacer. It's this tiny little thing with the 2 holes, and again it matches up with the 2 holes that we want on our left side on the rear base plate. Then we also need one of our end stops. This is the little limit switch type thing, and in case you're wondering where in the heck this is, like I just was a few minutes ago, I found these with the heated bed. All the switches are in there, so that's where I found the end stop. So you need one of those and a zip tie, and then the hardware that I mentioned. So what we're going to be doing is attaching these pieces here to our front and rear base plates, as well as getting our end stop for the Z-axis attached. So first things first, we will work on these parts here. Now what we're going to be dealing with from a mounting perspective is these holes right here and these holes right here. Now given the fact that we know that it's going to be mounted up like that, and that's why we're kind of keeping everything lined up like this, so we know kind of which way these are going to go in. Get these out of the way for the moment. So we know we need to figure out which way that we can get these to match up with these holes where the arrows are still going to be pointing towards the front. So the front is still pointing away from me. So if we push this up like this, we know that somehow I need to stick these in these two slots such that the arrows are pointing in that direction. So for example, if I try to do it over here, the arrow's in the right direction, but I cannot get all the slots and tabs to match up because there's this one over here and then there's this here, but they simply don't go together. And if I flip it around so that it does match up, oh great. But now we have our arrow pointing the wrong direction. Now we have the arrow pointing towards me on this one and away on the actual deck. So we know that, okay, this must go on this other side. So let's try to figure out how to get this in here such that the arrow points that way and that it matches everything hole wise. So it obviously can't go that way, and okay, the arrow is wrong anyway, so looks like if we assemble it like that, it matches up hole wise, and the arrow, if I can get the light shining through it, is actually pointing that way, so that works out for what we're trying to do. So now the arrow is pointing that way, the deck plate is pointing that way, so we know we're good to go. So we'll just leave it like that while we figure out the other one. Obviously once we have one of them figured out, you know, the other one becomes much easier because there's only one way it can possibly fit. So again, now that we have those in there, both of these arrows are now pointing away from me, which matches up with the deck, which has the arrows also pointing away from me. So now what we want to do is actually secure these. And in this case we have one of each kind of attachment, as we were just talking about with the washers and no washers and that sort of thing. So the one that just has the hole in between the two posts, if you will, two tabs, will not need a washer because it already has the security of the wood around it, so it's not going to go through as long as we don't go crazy. So that's the one that we don't need a washer for. So again, we're gonna go down here and get a nut captured in there. And sometimes, especially with a piece that you haven't secured anything yet to, sometimes it's easier just to put the nut in, you know, before you even attach it, and then get it into the slots and then secure it. Obviously once you have one of these in there, you can no longer take advantage of that trick, but so we get that sort of tightened in there. And now on this other part we do need the washer, so we'll go ahead and slide the washer on there. And as you can see, I'm not going to put the nut in just yet, but as you can see, once you put that washer in there, it kind of gives it a shoulder so that it can hang on to other parts of the wood and not just sink all the way through, which is what would happen if we don't have the washer. So I'm going to remove that real quick so I can get the nut going in there. Again, this is one of the trickier ones. Some people use pliers, needle nose, tweezers, what have you. Depends on if you have big fingers, big hands, that sort of thing. That may be a problem, but okay, I got that one pinched in there, and so I'm going to get that started again. You gotta sometimes wiggle that hex nut a little bit until the screw gets started, and then kind of tighten it down a bit. And now we have a nice solid connection for this particular piece. Maybe a little more on that one. Again, further on in the process, we'll tighten up a lot of these. Sometimes it's better to actually have it looser so that you have a little bit more play in the parts, because not all the connections are exactly super precise. So sometimes you need a little bit of play in order to get the connections. And then once you get everything tightened up, after it's put together, then everything will sort of solidify and square out. So we're going to do the same thing as we just did. I'm going to get the nuts started using the same little trick over there. And again, this is the one that doesn't need the washer. It's the one closest to the I guess the top of the base that doesn't need it. Get tightened up. Nut for the bottom one. And again, another 1/2 inch 6/32 machine screw. I kind of use them interchangeably, even though it's probably the wrong thing to do. Bolt, machine screw, what have you. So forgive that if it's technically not correct. All right. So now, back over here, back to our original. So now we have that attached to that side there. So ultimately what we need to do is get this side mounted on here, and we don't really have to do any alignments because we already know, or we already have everything sort of positioned for us by virtue of the fact that it's already attached to that side. So we just need to make sure that we've got it all lined up, and then press these tabs through the slots. And again, this is where having some of the wiggle room is going to help you, because then you can get these lined up without chancing breaking any of the connections off. So as you maybe can see, we've pushed those through there, so now all we need to do is get those tightened up with some hardware. So what I should have done is followed my own tip and put these nuts in here first. As others have said, you can use tape to kind of capture these nuts in place beforehand for some of the trickier ones. And some of them are actually not even possible to get going without using the tape method, so just be aware of that as you go along. So I'm just gonna rapidly run through these now that you've seen the process a few times, and especially since it's the same as the opposite side. And again, as you go along, continue to make sure that those arrows are pointing in the correct direction, because if you don't have every one of them going in the proper direction, then you're going to end up with something inside out or backwards, and it's going to have to be completely disassembled to fix it. So you'd rather get it right the first time and spend a little extra time doing that than having to tear everything down when you're almost ready to print, or so you thought. And the last one of these. Again, I can imagine this would be frustrating for those with larger hands. Mine are probably medium sized, but I'm still having some difficulty getting my hands into some of these tight spots. Again, just tightening down this last one here. Not doing it too tight because we still want to be able to mount it to the deck, although we're not quite ready for that yet because we still have our end stop, our zip tie, and our little spacer here that we need to deal with. But at this point, we should have this base assembly sort of put together and ready for the end stop, and then we're getting pretty close to getting ready for the deck to go on. So we will continue here momentarily with the end stop and finish up this phase. Alright, so we're going to continue with our installation of the end stop in the base plate area. And we originally had our rear piece laid down this way with the two holes right here facing to our left. But now that we actually have it assembled and standing up, and again, this would be the rear of the unit with the USB and SD card holes, but to make it easier to view, you may need to reorient this so that you can kind of get access to these two holes. Again, you need the end stop. It's a little micro switch that comes in the printer bed bag with several more switches and other cables. You need the little spacer, which is the thing that comes on the strip of laser cut pieces that has a bunch of little tiny pieces on it, and then a zip tie. Originally I had a black one, but it looks like with the diameter of the holes we're probably going to need one of the white ones because the black one simply won't fit. So I'm going to start the zip tie from the outside because we ultimately want to be able to tighten it from the outside, and then we're going to run it through the spacer simply because we need the switch further out. So we've got the part with more space kind of facing up or towards the tabs. So again, we're going to run it through this side here. Get a little more slack there, and just kind of snug it up against the wall there, and get some more slack so we have plenty of room to work. Now this part here, the actual switch, notice how it has this part here, and it can go like two different ways. So what we want is this part here, the open end, if you will, facing out. So if you can see that, so the open end is going to be towards the end out here, and basically what we're trying to do is get this mounted up so that the switch is, you're basically making a sandwich. You have the switch, then you have the spacer, and then you have the rear base plate. And then we're going to take the zip tie around back through the holes of both the spacer and the base plate, and ultimately connect it back on the outside and tighten things up so that we have our switch mounted. And again, this is can be a little frustrating depending on the size of your hands. And there is a hole, there's a set of holes as well through the actual switch itself. Probably should have showed you before I mounted this on here, but that's what's going to allow you to kind of match everything up. So effectively we have 3 sets of holes in here. We have the ones in the switch, we have the ones in the spacer, and then the ones in the outer piece. And as you can see, we have some success because we've now been able to go all the way through. So now we're going to take up some of the slack here wherever we can, wherever it will let us, so that we have it nice and tight. And Then hopefully you got the zip ties in the right direction, because as most of you know, the zip ties will only zip in one direction. So if you don't get it the right way, then you're gonna have to start completely over. Fortunately, we got that right. However, you've got a lot of looseness there, so this is where the pliers, needle nose, whatever you have, is going to come in handy to tighten things up. And there we go, that's what we want. We want to be able to get as much of that slack out of the system as we can. Of course, without tearing off the zip tie in the process. Okay, so we've got our wire there. We've got our switch on the outside. See that or not, and that's kind of what we're looking for. Again, the zip tie is nice and tight there. It's nice and tight here, and eventually we will clip this off to make it neater, but I want to leave it on there just in case we want to make some adjustments later on. So that completes the base step. Next we'll be moving on to the deck, and that's where things start getting exciting with the bearings and whatnot. So we are getting there. Thanks for watching step 1.